old enough to remember how it was growing, so I can tell you a bit historical story of almost. So I would like to first try to explain you that sustainability, really the concept of success, what does it mean. Then I would like to present some 4 sources for mindsets of the topics, how it emerged, the general idea. And then I would like to go more deeper what to understand under the sustainability, because also it is sometimes understood or misused. Everything is sustainable, and mostly marketing people like to do something. Everything is modern because it is fashionable term. So everything is fashion, everything is sustainable, but it is in fact, in reality, it is not. So, you know, I don't like marketing people, by the way. So, because we live in the marketing area where everything is marketing, up to the politics, where you should decide about innovation. You should decide based on the billboards what will be the future orientation of your country. So it is typical misuse of marketing. So that's why I don't like it. So let's come to the concept. In fact, the concept started more in academic sphere. So, you know, politicians and businessmen don't like it, or didn't like it very much. They prefer to continue and then thinking in traditional way. So the academics, or not all of them, started to bring these ideas, which in fact after some period grew into the overwhelming concept of sustainability. And then it had been promoted from academic sphere. It moved to some international organization. Maybe everybody knows something about the rainbows, and so that or in non-governmental organization, and then follow up. It grew into the activities of some intergovernmental organization who are trying now to promote it and to get it into life. Not always very successfully, but in fact, you know, there is very strong ideological pressure here, because in fact so-called economists, pure economists, consider economic growth as something like an icon which should be achieved for any case. So there is some contradictory pressures between these academicians and the people who understand what is going on and try to understand what are the limits of this permanent economic growth, and the institutions who try to promote it. So, particularly business sphere was in fact very resistible to the concept, and only last year, under the pressure, under political pressure mostly, they try to introduce the concept into their life, and sometimes they declare that it is sustainable, but not always it is in reality true. So still sustainability is not the dominant trend in economic thinking. Still there are some discussions about it, so I would like to clarify or to go deeper to it. So we are coming to the mindset. Where it did emerge, where it started, the idea, and how and why. So in fact, I succeeded to identify at least 4 directions of thinking who in fact have born this idea. First, this is the discourse about the basic terms. What is economic growth? What is economic development? So it is highly academic discourse, but in fact has very, very practical consequences. The second the second source of thinking is the perception and search for solution of global problems. And in fact, it was within this framework. This is in fact the term limits to the growth, or understanding limits to the economic growth, and a very sophisticated approach. I have shown us, I will show you in a few minutes, what we knew already 50 years ago, but in fact we were ignoring, not me. But in general, elites did it. The next one is also currently running the process or contradiction of the trends, contradictive trends between globalization and deglobalization or anti-globalization, which is in the sphere of real processes, but also in the sphere of political thinking. So I would like also to tell some few words about this. And the last is that the political concept for the, understanding some future development of global economy, which is now, as I already thought, promoted by international institutions mostly. So first, let's start open the explanation of the discourse of how to understand economic growth and economic and social development. In fact, before, in 60s, you were not in this world. Already, this discussion started, and in fact, it was the first period when there were identified some negative consequences of economic growth, mostly like environmental protection or environmental damages created by economic or generated by economic growth. And so that's the first period when this discourse started, and there was a first differentiation between the term of economic growth and economic development. Maybe you a bit feel the difference in it, but many economists didn't do it. And the only academic sphere started to make the distinction between these two categories, and also it was connected with methodological topic, how to measure economic growth and economic development, which is a bit more complicated topic, and its consequences with development of global economy from static but also from dynamic point of view. Just coming to this measuring, you know, the very typical way how to measure economic growth is to compare GDP, gross domestic product, of new year in comparison to previous year. You know, by the way, when the GDP is not very old parameter, it emerged only in the 30s of previous century, because it was a necessity to solve the economic crisis or Big Depression of 30s, and also preparation for the war. It was necessary to somehow have evidence for American government, to have the evidence how it should be prepared and how to solve the problem. So that is economist, maybe you have heard his name, Kuznets, who came with the concept of, at the beginning, GNP, sorry, it is GNP, not D, gross national product, which was later in the second half of 20th century changed into gross domestic product. I don't want to explain what does it mean. In fact, theoretically, I hope you are students of higher classes, so you have met it in macroeconomics. But generally, this is the more simplified way how to measure economic growth. And already, as I told, in the 60s, there started some academics mostly started to feel that it has not only positive influence or positive results, but there are also some damaging. Because, for instance, if you calculate GDP and you want to calculate how to eliminate the negative environmental consequences, so these damages are also increasing GDP. Yeah, so that's where the discussion started about new parameters, and you can see them, the measure of economic welfare, which is already reducing something out of the GDP, because it is in fact not progressive, but it is damaging economic development and social and economic situation in the country. So it is first one. They started just with mostly with environment and defense costs. Then it was later developed into genuine progress indicator, which is already showing that, and you can feel that there is some difference, just economic. Growth is not the progress always. Then later, in fact, at the end of the century, even American economist Joseph Stiglitz was asked by a French president to create some review, or to do some review how to measure and to propose the system of measuring. So this commission is sometimes called the Stiglitz Commission, who prepared the review and trying to compare the different measures. Here you can find some of them, which is some of them sounds quite funny, because it is gross domestic happiness introduced by the Kingdom of Bhutan, by the way, who don't measure GDP, but they measure how the inhabitants are happy with their life, which is more important than just to see that your bank account is growing. So these you have the different types of indicators who try already incorporate not just pure increase of GDP or just economic activities, but differentiate it about its consequences for the normal better life. By the way, do you know, for instance, in indicator of Happy Planet Index, who is the best country? There are sometimes moving, but for instance Costa Rica and many Caribbean countries, maybe just because of this, but also the Nordic countries from Scandinavia are considered as the countries where the levels, the quality of level, which is the indicators of this development, is considered or perceived by the people as the best. And finally, we came to the indicator which is now called Sustainable Society Index. So here you can already see the word sustainability. Okay? So I will show you what does it belong to it, but just this is genesis of these approaches to this in theoretical sphere just by attempts to measure it. But in fact, still dominating way of thinking is the dominating role of economic growth. Our society is not able to function without economic growth. Have a look to the politicians' programs, and everybody, generally, they can promise everything. Politicians before election promise everything. Yeah, everybody promised bring or increase economic growth. So we live in something. Do you know Bible? Yeah? Do you know it is something like worshipping of golden calf? You know the story? Yeah. Jews wandering in 40 years and they were bringing all the time the golden cow with, because not having the gods, only Messiah, and increase this on refuse this. But we are like these Jews with golden calf of economic growth. Still, it is politically most important parameter for politicians, and in fact, it is integral part, or considered as an integral part of national security and global status of each economy. And, of course, the state. So, golden calf. But the problem is that that continuing growth is not sustainable. You know, we have here in Czech and Slovak, we have the proverb, no tree grows to the sky. Have you heard it? No tree can grow up. Yeah? Never, all the time. So there are some limits. And that's, in fact, not accepted by political sphere yet. So, in fact, we are trying to promote economic growth, not we, but our representative, democratically elected representative, try to generate or to promote economic growth at any cost, even by Keynes stimulation, but unfortunately it has very negative consequences even in the economic mechanism or economic sphere, because in fact we are the witnesses of the inflation, inflated real estates, inflating assets on stock exchanges, etc., and the different speculative bubbles which then explode, and we have the crisis which is much deeper than before. So, and then also, in fact, how the politician can finance this stimulation by debt. So indebtedness in global frame is increasing in almost each country. Not speaking about now our government now. But generally, when we have a look to the bit far history, we see that human mankind, most of its history lived without economic growth. It is just the phenomena of last 200 years. So the question is, can it grow up to the heaven? No. Even statistically, not. When you build, you have nothing, and you build one factory, your growth is 100. In the next year, you build the same new factory, your economic growth is
50%.
30%. And more you add to it, statistically it is reducing the rate of growth. So even mathematically it is nonsense.
Sorry, is it possible that it was not measured before? For example, in 1700 they don't have enough data to have a conclusion that the growth was not there.
You know, there is one Danish university where there was he died already. He was a specialist on economic history, and he was concluding and in fact analyzing the different data and comparing it with this GDP, like GDP, because it didn't exist. Yeah, as I told, it is the 30th or 20th century. So, in fact, he created methodology how to transfer the data which are available into these parameters comparable with modern way of thinking. So that's why we have this. Now you see that even it doesn't work, even now. You see that what World Bank is in fact trying to estimate what is the future, and you see that we are coming to the period of zero growth or even minus growth. And particularly this was during the COVID pandemic, it was already back. But we live with it, we could live with this. So, then let's come into, there are the different theoreticians who try to explain and bring the theory. Some are so-called mainstream theoreticians, academics usually sitting in the important institution and getting the salaries from being the board members. And they are promoting this first theory, which is the infinite economic growth. This is the way of thinking I was trying to criticize a bit. But there was, since 1970, there is a new school of so-called limit to growth, which came with a model and trying to eliminate this idea of infinite growth. Then there are also the growth theories which trying to explain that it is endogenous factor, so internal factor of economic mechanism which is generating the growth, and that's the result. But then there is a new concept of sustainable development which came to the end of 80s as a reaction to the theory of limit of growth, and finally we came to the conclusion of not we but generally some theoreticians and some politicians came to the idea of negative economic growth or even degrowth. So in fact, as I told, in 60s there was a first attempt to do it, and there was this discourse about measuring came to the idea of sustainable. I tried to show you the genesis of it. And then the second attempt, or the second route of sustainability, is coming from the territory of global problems. I hope you know what means global problems, so I don't go deeply to it. By the way, I don't have time for it. But what is interesting is that in 70s, where already the computerization started, there was an attempt of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology professors, who created the model of global economy with basic parameters, like you can see them here: population, resources, food, industrial services, outputs, pollution, etc., etc. You will get it. So I'm not reading just. But what is interesting on this graphic, what conclusion you can see of it? When the decrease of economic growth starts, let's try to estimate it on the time scale.
It's in 5 years?
Between 20 and 30. 2020 and 2030. Is it reality?
In Hungary, it's definitely a reality.
Yeah. 50 years this model exists. 50 years we know that it will happen, and it happened. And it was totally ignored. By the way, criticized mostly by neoliberals, the way of thinking that no, economic progress will solve everything. Technological progress, and so the more economic growth solves all the problems. So it was not just very simplified. You see on the model of the food and population growth how complicated interrelations were modeled within that model in 1970. So the result is, it is also interesting, it emerged in 1970. This was done on the real data up to the 1970s. They were put into the model with these interlinks threshold. Then one Australian economist, G. Turner, came and after 30 years put real data to the model. This is this part. What do you see from it?
It was accurate.
Yeah. So we know that it is accurate, we know that it functions, we know that there are limits, but it was still ignored. The newest concept is from 21st century, so-called planetary boundaries. They are saying that their life in global scale has some boundaries, and if our human activity will cross these boundaries, it can make irreversible changes of, in fact, life on the planet Earth. And there are 9 of them. This is a concept which was first presented in 2015 on World Economic Forum in Davos. You see, and then it is now the data after 7 years. What you see, is it improving? The borders are this black circle, green if it is still okay, if it is crossing, so it is already danger, and it starts to be irreversible. So you see that we have crossed already some of them. So new phenomena which is necessary to take into account when speaking how should the human society progress, how should it develop in the future. And here you have the interlinks, how this system, the limits are interconnected, etc., etc. I think you will get this presentation so you can go deeper. I have no time. The next root of sustainability is the dispute about the globalization and deglobalization. No, the globalization is a process we are facing more or less in the beginning of the last third of 19th century, and it moved up. Here we have some growth and some phasing of this process. There was the first phase of globalization was between 1860 up to First World War. Then there was a period of deglobalization, so the countries were closing and trying to solve the crisis and the war within their own boundaries. Then you see the decrease. Then after the Second World War, it comes to the increase, up to the so-called hyper-globalization, which was at the peak on 2008, when the big global financial crisis started. And since this process, since this day, we see that there is deglobalization. And why we speak it as or in connection with sustainability, in fact, the globalization was connected with interdependence of all countries in the global economy, and this growth was not very sustainable. We are moving some things from one part of the world to another one, just with small margin, but because it is cheaper to produce it in China or in Taiwan or in Bangladesh, so we move it, even if it could be produced locally. So this is also one discourse or one way of thinking in favor of sustainability and to try to so-called reshoring. You know, offshoring was putting these industries to these cheap countries, and now after this collapse, particularly after COVID, then we are facing the limits because you know that our cars can be bought in Skoda for 1 year. You have to wait because there are no chips, which should be imported from Taiwan, and because of Suez crisis, and etc., etc. So these so-called global value chains have been distorted, and now we see that it is not so easy just to produce in cheap countries and to sell for high prices in advanced countries. There is the process of reversibility or reverse of it, and sustainability is one of the ideas which could support this. Now we see here you have some review of the actual risks which are causing it. Maybe most of them you already know. The last one is the political implications. Political implication is, in fact, it started politically. As I told, some institutions started to understand it, especially almost immediately after the limit of growth had been published, and already in the 80s there was a first commission which had been established by United Nations and headed by former Norwegian Prime Minister Brundtland, which was a lady. And she, in fact, for the first time declared the new term, sustainable development. Idea of sustainable development, which was a reaction to the limits of growth, more or less. And the definition was that we have to follow the path where sustainable development is development via not living on the debt transferred to the next generation, to your generation, by the way. So this is the general idea, to try to keep economic and social development on just different way, not to promote the social injustice, environmental damages, etc., etc., because this is in fact living the life on the debt. Then, based on this, there was a concept presented on some conferences which were organized by United Nations. So maybe the most known are the Rio de Janeiro summit. So here you see the review of these summits, which in fact was supported by all members of United Nations. But you know, support, political support, is something different from the action. So still there is more blah 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 than real actions. Even it is, I have to commit that really there are already something changed. So in fact there were some programs originated by United Nations. The most known are in fact on the edge of new millennium. There were so-called Millennium Development Goals, which already try to incorporate some topics or some issues dealing with sustainability. And then after it was on the edge of two millenniums or 2 centuries, 2 decades, whatever we want. And in fact, they were assessed they were programmed for 15 years. And after 15 years, they've been evaluated. Not all of them, not all of these goals have been fulfilled, but majority was. So then, based on this success, there were a new program of United Nations established, which is called Sustainable Development Goals. So approved by General Assembly, and here you have some very brief comparison of these 2 parts, and now how the countries approach, the governments, do they approach evaluation, so you can find your country if it is on positive side or negative side, but definitely we are not on the level of Uganda. Then concept is and so what's the content? How to understand? In fact, it is understood of 3 components which are mutually interlinked and co-regard. So here you have on this scheme, you have it, and in fact what means sustainability, I don't have the laser, but sustainability is only this small phase of it. But each part of development has its own goals and its own content, and here you find it. Then I told you that I will speak about the social sustainable index, sustainable society index. So here you have the methodology how to measure it, and final evaluation on the global. So we see that really we are not living in the period of full sustainability, but only partial. Then there was also the project by United Nations, the Circles of Sustainability, which is not putting together just 3 elements, but also 4th, which is the culture. So bringing this new, more, let's say, emotional or non-material component of it. So you see also the evaluations. The project unfortunately finished in 2019. So now the definition. So it is development which is meeting the needs of current generation without damaging the future generation. and giving them some depth. So this is now the actual definition of sustainable development. We in fact differ between two types of sustainability. One is so-called weak sustainability, and then there is a strong. In fact, the weak sustainability just saying all what is used for the production and consumption should be replaced and need some replacement. So it is a concept of circular economy, and strong sustainability means that in fact for all these you need energy. If you will have the energy, so you can achieve the full sustainability or the strong sustainability, what means that for all economic activities and social activities you should use only renewable sources of energy. So it is also the target for the future. So we see that then there are some how to promote, how to connect it with growth, is the so-called another term which is green growth. So put investment only to the industries and spheres which are green, so which are environmental friendly and are able to fulfill the goals. But also there is also critique, so-called decoupling. No, until now, always when there was new technology, it didn't bring stagnation or fixation of growth, but it supported another growth. You build new highway, within 2 years it's full. You reduce the consumption of oil or the petrol in the car, so people drive more. And the topic, or the basic issue is to separate these. If you find new technology, if you implement the technology, it should not to promote economic growth, but it should contribute to the development and sustainability. That's a big problem, big issue here, because until now decoupling is not working. Even it is included into sustainability development goals of the United Nations. So another idea, and it is last slide, is the so-called negative growth or degrowth, saying we should stop growth, we shouldn't increase consumption. Do you need to buy each year or each 2 years new mobile?
No.
Do you need to buy each 4 years new car?
No.
But we do.
Not everybody.
Not everybody. So this is degrowth. Degrowth is in fact not the theory, it is just social movement which is in fact trying to bring ecological economics, anti-consumer and anti-capitalist approach. This is not very popular among politicians, and so that's still it is just some way of thinking rather than real trend of economic and social development. So, sorry I got not too much time. I could talk to you about this maybe more times, but I am limited. Like the economic growth, I am also limited. So thank you for attention.
Thank you.